Lestat De Lioncourt is one of the biggest names in all of vampire lore, probably only second to Dracula in terms of best known vampires. He is the center point to the Vampire Chronicles novels in addition to being one of the most powerful vampires to ever exist. However, Lestat never asked nor wanted the dark gift. It was forced upon him, and what's worse is his maker left him with little to no knowledge on the makings of the vampire race. Lestat was actually never shown how to be a vampire. The individual in question was Magnus, a 300-year-old vampire who chose Lestat as his successor after a selection process that consisted of dozens of candidates, and then he just threw himself into a fire. So this is his tale. This is the story of the vampire Magnus, Lestat's creator. Magnus was born sometime in or around the early 1400s in Europe. The exact country remains unclear, but judging from the artistic layout of his home, it is believed to be a Western European country. He was tall, had long black hair, black eyes, and rather definitive facial features. From early on in his life, he had developed a big interest in alchemy and the occult, as he sought after the secret to immortality. It wasn't until later in his life that Magnus came as close as he ever would to the point to prevent his death when he discovered the existence of vampires. Roche-Mendez, the leader of the Parisian vampires and a very powerful individual, refused to give Magnus the dark gift due to not wanting to expand the number of vampires further. In addition to that, Magnus was also quite old. His limbs were starting to become malformed due to the aging of his bones, and vampires are strictly not to give the blood to individuals who are not in good physical health. Roche-Mendez was also incredibly vain and arrogant, and would dangle the prospect of the dark gift before many, before denying them outright, out of sheer entertainment and enjoyment. This is what happened when Magnus made his request to Roche-Mendez. Magnus was turned away, but he was not going to accept his current fate. He was going to take immortality for himself. He followed a young member of Roche-Mendez's inner circle, a vampire by the name of Benedict, and waited for him to slumber. He removed him from his coffin, bound him in heavy chains in a catacomb at the crucial time right before dusk. As the sun set, Magnus drank the blood from the helpless vampire, stealing the dark gift for himself, making him into an immortal. Just for additional info guys, if you're wondering why Benedict didn't wake or anything like that, when a vampire sleeps, they go into a comatose state. Not even shouting, loud noises, or even an explosion could wake them, which is why Magnus was able to successfully move Benedict without any issues. After becoming a vampire, Magnus didn't know much about himself or what the dark gift could bestow upon him, and also what his limitations were. He had to learn everything from experimentation, which may be why he never told us that much either, but we'll get to that part a little later. Magnus became quite an isolated vampire. His means of becoming a vampire hampered any social interaction that could have been possible with Roche-Mendez and his own coven. Over the coming centuries, Magnus accumulated a vast amount of wealth, but simultaneously began to deeply struggle with the eternal longevity that immortality brings. He decided he was going to end his life as a vampire after 3 centuries of living alone, and began looking for the perfect successor. That is not an exaggeration, guys. Magnus had his mind set on choosing someone who had all the traits worthy to inherit everything that would be left to that individual. Magnus chose candidate after candidate, all blonde-haired, blue-eyed, handsome men, but never seemed to follow through on the creation process, with something just stopping him at the required moment. This went on for some time, which resulted in a pile of dead bodies accumulating in his cellar. That was until he came across an actor by the name of Lestat De Lioncourt. He watches Lestat's performances in the theatre night after night, and Lestat can feel the presence of someone watching him. One night, Magnus follows Lestat home. He goes to his room and snatches him from his bed. pulling him out the window and into the cold night. Magnus had grown tired of his search for a successor and had chosen Lestat, finally, from a long list of candidates. He sinks his fangs into Lestat and the latter knows almost immediately that it is a vampire that has him. However, Lestat also sees images which presented darkness to him. When Lestat awakens the very next night, he finds that he is a prisoner in the vampire's tower. After he eats and drinks the food left out for him, he discovers he is not alone. The vampire takes hold of him again, and Lestat knows he is too weak and too drunk to fight back. As Lestat calls on God and the saints for help, the vampire strikes him hard and threatens him again if he continues such actions. Magnus drinks from him again, and Lestat sees that he stole immortality from the vampire who made him. After he stops, Magnus makes a slash in his throat and makes Lestat drink from him. It is this action that transforms Lestat into a vampire. During Lestat's imprisonment in the tower, it was always inevitable that death would be involved. If Magnus makes him a vampire, Lestat will die a mortal death. If Magnus kills him, he will just die. Lestat knows, though, that something bad was about to happen to him. For the reader, it is pretty obvious what Magnus's intentions are. If Magnus wanted to torture Lestat or just kill him, he would not have left out such good quality food and wine for him to consume. Even Lestat recognized that the wine was too good for imprisonment. Magnus takes Lestat to where his coffin is and makes sure that he can lift the stones away. Then Magnus shows Lestat the treasure he has so that there will be no need for money. Then he lights a large fire and tells Lestat that he is ending his life. He leaves Lestat with very little information about being a vampire, only to never drink past the heart stopping and to never walk in the sun. That's about it. Nothing about the history of vampires, nothing about where they came from, and this is all too much for Lestat. It completely overwhelms him. He gets very upset and tries to convince Magnus to stay, but Magnus refuses. He tells Lestat to scatter his ashes when it is finished, and he leaps into the fire. Just like that. So quick and so sudden. Lestat watches Magnus burn and cries over the loss of a master. There you have it, guys. That is my take on the life of Magnus the Vampire. Make sure to check out some of my most recent videos, and I'll chat to you all very soon.